Good evening and welcome to a very special 2015 Domestic Violence Awareness Forum. I am thrilled to be here and I am thrilled to bring you breaking information on domestic violence. Tonight we are joined by 4 esteemed community members and a live audience for questions and answers. My name is Laurel Lynch and I'm the CEO of Hope Family Services, and we're Manatee County's domestic violence service provider. Next month is National Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and we have lots of great information to share with you tonight. And our main goal for being here really is to bring awareness to this very dark subject. You know, you only have to open the newspaper, turn on the television, or turn on your radio, and you'll hear another tragic story about a battered woman and her children being injured or worse yet killed. Well, we're here to talk about that tonight. And we're here to talk about it so that women who need our services know where to go for help. The sad, startling statistic is that 95% of the people who are killed at the hands of their significant other never come to an organization like Hope for help. So what that tells me is what we do works. We save lives every day. But we can't do it without you, our community. We can't do it without your help. And so tonight we want to talk about domestic violence. We want to shine a new light on this issue. And if you need help or you know someone who needs help, please, I encourage you, get them to us. It may be the call that will save their life. With me tonight, I am thrilled to introduce Pastor. Good evening, Pastor Washington. Thank you for being here. Pastor Washington is from the Life-Changing International Ministries. I appreciate you being here. It's not every day we can talk to someone in the faith-based community about domestic violence. Maria Briones, one of my favorite people. Maria is a victim advocate at Hope. She's been there for almost 9 years. She was 5 when she started. And she oversees the farm worker outreach program because Latino women, from what I understand, have a unique set of challenges that keep them from accessing services. And so Maria is here to talk about that with us. Thank you for being here, Maria.
Thank you for having me.
My friend Avery Burke, senior I'm going to mess this up, homeless outreach specialist, our go-to person. We have homeless questions. Avery is also an Army veteran, and I didn't know that about you. Thank you for your service, and thank you for being here. So appreciate it. And you've been with Centerstone, formerly known as Manatee Glens, since 2002. You too must have been about 5 when you started, or maybe 6. And Kim Donatelli. Kim, one of our seasoned advocates at Hope, been there for almost 12 years. And I've known her for 28 years, plus or minus. Yeah. And Kim is a CPI, domestic violence CPI specialist, which is the Child Protective Investigative Unit that she's partnered with at the Sheriff's Office. And she'll tell you about that. It's a fascinating program that she's had great success with. So let's get started. Kim, if I can start with you, tell me, how has domestic violence touched your life, your work? Why is this important to you?
Well, for me, it affected me personally. Many years ago, I found myself in a very abusive marriage. I was very fortunate that I was able to get out after only 3 years, but it was pretty tragic what had happened when I finally had the courage, I guess, strength, and the help to leave him. And so I had made a promise many years ago that if I survived that, I was going to help other people. And so now I get to go to work every day and help other people to hopefully live safer lives.
And thank you for doing that, not only for being here, but for helping us to save lives every day. Avery, why domestic violence? How has this had an impact on you, your life, your work?
Well, I mean, growing up, you see things, and, you know, growing up, it was just like you see it, but you don't see it. Everything was swept under the rug. Coming to work for Centerstone, we see homeless families, homeless children and women and children in cars. And some of the stories you hear, you know, it touches you. You know, I don't have anything. Everything is in the car, and they don't know where to go. So having a place like Hope is a big help.
Well, thank you. And thank you also for being here. Maria, domestic violence.
I'm also a survivor, and my mom was also a survivor, so it has touched me in both ways. And I grew up in an abusive scenario with domestic violence.
Pastor Washington?
It is very important. In my life as a pastor, I realized growing through the years that every couple that comes in the church does not always have a successful marriage or relationship. And so when we encounter those that have issues, maybe violent or whatever it is they're going through, we realize that there's some spiritual aspects to it, but there's also some outside services that can help, that we can refer individuals to give them that extra help that they need to build a healthy relationship.
Well, and thank you also for being here. And I think it does bring a unique perspective. And we'll talk about that and batterers and how they sort of frame this in their families. But let's start with if we can define domestic violence, because really for people watching, there might be folks who don't know exactly what are these people talking about? What is domestic violence? And there's a legal definition. I've had the pleasure of working with folks from the state attorney's office like Heather Doyle and Lisa Chitterow and Ed Brodsky, our state attorney, and I've learned through them that the legal definition under Florida statute 741.28, you probably don't want me to quote all that, is that it's an assault, a battery, sexual assault, sexual battery, stalking, aggravated stalking, and I could recite the whole thing. I won't bore you, but in essence, it's a physical act of violence. I mean, it's usually an intimate partner, one person in a family hurting somebody else in a family. And so we're really talking about families that there's some behavior that places one person physically afraid of another person. That's in terms of getting help from law enforcement, getting help from the courts, the state attorney's office. But my understanding is that the definition that we all use is a bit more broad.
Right.
Kim?
Right. And actually, I think for any of us working at Hope, we would hope that people would come into our organization long before it ever is physical violence. And so we're looking more at the behavior, the pattern of behavior that's happening, very coercive tactics being used by a partner to manipulate, to gain power and control over someone they claim to love. And
tactics including, like, I mean, if somebody walks in with a black eye or their arm's in a sling, we've had a woman not terribly long ago who was stabbed multiple times. Right. That was obvious. Right. But what other kinds of things can batterers use when you say coercive control? What kinds of behaviors?
There's a lot of manipulation, degrading. I think for many women, financial abuse, isolation. You know, the majority of women that are living in relationships where there is violence, they're not usually living next door to their mom and dad. And so for many times they're being separated from people that would maybe recognize a change in them. And so for a lot of batterers, they're using tactics, whether it's financial abuse, isolating their partner, degrading their partner, using the children against them. We see that a lot, especially now on this project that we've been working on for 6 years. So very different tactics, and yet we see a pattern, and that's what we're taking a look at to really measure how lethal this potentially could be, even if somebody comes into our office and it hasn't yet moved to physical violence.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. So one of the things we're asked every day is, well, you know, if somebody's doing all these things, they're taking your money, they're monitoring your whereabouts, they're threatening that they're going to call the authorities on your children, all those tactics that you talked about, why do women stay? I mean, what's the, Maria, you know, the women you work with, what do they tell you? Why do they stay?
Not all women stay. Some, you know, they do leave the abusive relationship. Most of them, the reasons why they stay, especially in the farm working community, it's because of the financial or the housing. They don't have anywhere to go because they work in a part where they're contracted by, you know, crew leaders, or the other reason would be because of deportation. If I call the police, I'm going to be deported, or my children are going to be taken away because they don't know about our services, or because they don't have language. And I think the language barrier is a lot.
Fear. I mean, I think many women stay out of fear. It's, you know, for just doing the studies over the years of looking at this epidemic, that, you know, women are dying when they're leaving more than they're dying by staying. And so for many women, they're coming into our office and we're safety planning them to live in an abusive marriage.
And I think that's a really good point, Kim. When you stop and think about it, this behavior, as you said, is really about power and control.
Yeah.
And so if I'm a batterer and you tell me you're leaving me, you're taking control. Right. I flare up when I just imagine I'm losing control. So really, you are in greater danger when you choose to leave. And I think that's a very valid point. Plus, how hard is it to start over again? Avery, when you work with people in the homeless population, you know, you've got a mom in a car like you were talking about, and she wants to get going, get on her own 2 feet, not go back to that batter. How difficult is it in Manatee County to start over again when you're homeless?
It's about $2,500 to $3,000 in cash difference to get into a place. A single parent, a woman with one child, you're looking at a 2-bedroom. It's going to be about $850 to $900 rent, just for the rent. Security deposit will be the same, you know, light deposit, water deposit. It's expensive to move into that change from being stable to being in the car and then finding the place. You become homeless, and it's scary because the streets are very scary to someone that don't know how to survive on the streets. And so I think a lot of women don't leave or don't report, and they stay because I don't have the money, or I don't have the job, or if you have a job, it's not enough to manage and maintain.
And living in your car with children, CPS is coming out and law enforcement is getting involved.
We'll come back to that impact on children.
There are many,
It's a lot of things that you have to consider, and I think once you get into that power struggle and that person is controlling and they have you thinking that it's nowhere to go, the fear factor sits in.
Yeah.
And you said something important. I mean, that fear factor of not knowing where to go, and I've dealt with that several times, especially with you know, young Black African American women, that you know, they have the means to go, but that lack of sense of security of starting over, or my kids, their father is there, so I don't want to take the kids from the father, but they're not realizing that they're still putting the kids in danger as well. So, you know, the loss of that security, the environment of starting over, the job, getting CPS involved and all that kind of stuff. They don't want to go through all those desperate measures. And we've sent people to the Hope Foundation before, you know, to try to get a fresh start.
And what about if I'm a batter and I start quoting the Bible, that, well, doesn't it say, Pastor, that my wife's supposed to be submissive to me?
Of course it does, but at the same time, I think that there's a lack of biblical teaching. There's different translations of that text, and I think a lot of times as men, we read just that first line, but you got to keep on reading. And I have that text with us today, if you don't mind. It says, in Colossians chapter 3, verse 18 and 19, it says, "Wives, submit to your husbands as fitting into the Lord. Husbands, love your wives and do not be embittered against them." In other words, I don't supposed to treat her any kind of way. If God is my head and I love God, I have to love her just as much as Christ would love me. And so many times when I counsel couples, you know, that consider marriage, I want to let them know that this is a serious matter. You have to deal with the man in his role. You have to deal with the wife in her role. And most of the time, 90% of the time, the man does not know his biblical role in the relationship. He gets it from a pattern through life of watching his own father.
Right.
And how daddy treated mom. So they come to a senses of thinking, this is the way it's supposed to be done. I never saw him really lead us in a godly way, in a godly fashion. So when troubles come, then we play that I'm the boss and what I say goes. And I always tell a woman will never have problem following a man and submitting to a man that's following God.
So if I come to you and I'm one of your congregants and this is going on in my family, and I turn to you and just, I'm sure you know this, at Hope, it's been our experience that oftentimes women of color will turn to their pastor before they turn to us.
Right.
They do come to us, but they're going to talk to you
Right.
first, which is, I think we're all in this together.
Right.
So I come to you and I say, okay, look, I'm scared to go home. He's really being ugly and mean, and he's saying this is my role. How are you going to approach him? Are you going to, Like, I don't know. How are you going to?
It can be a delicate situation. Sometimes they're prone to want to come in and talk. Sometimes they don't. If they don't, we encourage that young lady to find a place. We do whatever we can to find a place where she can rest or take the children, whatever. And if I'm led or someone that knows that individual, that male figure, will try to reach out to them in the spirit of love, because we don't know, we might not know everything that's going on.
Absolutely.
So we have to start somewhere, to get to that individual, to give some encouragement there.
Well, thank you. And thank you for letting me put you on the hot seat. And if I can just go a little bit further, can you say no with the cameras rolling? Not sure about that. Within the last year, there was a tragic murder here in Manatee County, and I only know what I read in the newspaper. A pastor here in Manatee County was counseling a woman. Allegedly, according to the newspaper, her husband found out, came there, was on some kind of killing spree. Anyway, killed the pastor. Has that changed how you do business? Has that changed your view of domestic violence or how to keep yourself safe if you're talking to me and I come to you? It
hasn't changed my view on what I do. But what I've learned along the years, I'm young, but I also grew up in ministry, and I put my eyes on the older generation that did this stuff before I did.
Oh, very wise.
And so one of the wisest things that I learned, even as a pastor going into that role, is that when it comes to individual counseling, especially when it deals with females, when they have a potential male spouse or significant other that's maybe insecure, I don't counsel alone. I never counsel alone. You bring somebody, if that significant other can't come, we make another appointment where they can come. And you keep those spouses in the loop of what's going on. And sometimes, I always say what goes on in these four walls of this meeting, of this counseling session, stays here. But sometimes keeping those secrets can be detrimental too, especially when another party feels like they're being left out. And sometimes it can paint a picture that's not really true, where a person says, well, I'm just getting help. But in their eyes, they may be saying, well, I feel like you're cheating, you're spending too much time there, X, Y, Z, and the list goes on and on. So to prevent that, you have to be proactive and says, if I'm going to deal with the man, if I'm going to deal with the woman, let's deal with them together, not separate.
We have a little different view on that. We'll talk about it later. But and one of the things I think we would suggest is if you're helping, lock the door so that somebody can't get in. Just sometimes those simple things, because there was another tragedy in another state where a young man went into a church and sat down like he was there for some Bible study. And, the way I grew up, this was a safe place. This was the sanctity of a church or a temple or a mosque. Nobody dared mess with that. And clearly,
I think a lot of churches are beefing up their security.
That's good.
Ever since those things
That's
happened.
what I like to hear. Because you just can't predict. And batterers don't walk around with a big B tattooed on their forehead any more than victims walk around with a V. So I appreciate you letting me put you on the hot seat, as I said. So what can we do as a community to lower the homicide rate? I mean, we're pretty active around here. We've had any number of near deaths or actual homicides. So what can we do as a community to help save these people's lives?
Well, I think doing this right here is a really good thing, to bring awareness to the community that not only that there's a service like Hope Family Services out there to help them, there's pastors, there's outreach through homelessness, that we as a community are taking steps to try and figure out how can we help people that are in these unsafe families. But for me, we really need to start, the criminal justice system really needs to start holding batterers accountable, along with us in the community. We don't prosecute at a rate that I think we should. I know that it's a very difficult crime to prosecute. I hear that. But in the same respect, if we are arresting people and then letting them out and then not following through with the prosecution, I think we are doing nothing but empowering domestic violence within the home. And so I think that we need to do a better job prosecuting this crime.
I agree with you, because I can't tell you how many countless times as a pastor was frustrated with when you get a 21, 22-year-old who has children and says, I've called the police department and I've got numerous restraining orders, and they still won't come when my life is in danger.
Or when they say, well, you two are married, deal with it.
And people will stop asking for help. I mean, that's just what's going to happen. And I have gals that I work with every day that say, I won't call for help anymore because the help doesn't seem to help.
And if they have, sorry, Avery.
I think an understanding, I know we had mentioned about Safe Children, but
that's where I was
think
going.
an understanding of what they do. I've talked to people and and like she said that, well, if I'm sleeping in my car, they're going to take my kids. Not necessarily true, but a lot of people don't get that understanding. They're so afraid that if I don't have a roof over my head, then they're going to take my children. So even if they're homeless, they won't report that.
An abuser has been putting all this in their head, saying, if you call the police, you're going to be without children, or you're going to be deported.
So I think a total awareness of not just what it is, but what other agencies and what services are available to people, so they'll understand that it's not necessarily that they're going to take my kids, but it's a way to help me get away from a situation and possibly get into a better one. So.
And if nothing else, coming to our shelter will give you a timeout to figure out what your next steps are. And certainly I don't want to paint a broad brush stroke over an entire system, but our child welfare system is not always user-friendly towards survivors of domestic violence. One of the things, and if we can go back to batterer accountability, one of the things that I've certainly learned over the nearly 30 years of doing this work is they look at mom to stop the violence that dad is perpetrating. And I always just scratch my head and wonder, I said to a law enforcement officer, a woman with whom I'm not particularly popular, I might add, who has a big gun on her hip at the time of the conversation, I said, you can't stop him and you have a gun. But your expectation is that if she doesn't stop the violence in her family, you're taking her kids. I'm kind of confused. I mean, I was a teensy bit sarcastic, which if you know me, you know that that's how I roll. But I was trying to make a very valid point. And so I agree with you. I think holding batterers accountable. And when people come to us in our shelter, the other thing that I think is key is safety planning.
Absolutely.
So I don't know if you want to talk to safety planning, because, I said when we opened, 95% of the people killed in Florida at the hands of their partner never came to a center like Hope for help. Okay, so what is it that we do? I mean, we could talk about why aren't we getting the 95% in. That's a whole other conversation. But the people that are coming in are not the ones being killed. So what is it that we do? What is it that you do? Because I don't do it. I get to host TV shows like this. What is it that you all do that are on the front line that help keep them safe?
Well, I think that's why going back to the behavior of what's happening in the home is so important, because yes, every woman or man that uses Hope services is going to be offered safety planning, but how we're going to do that is going to depend on what has been happening in the home. Some families, it's not a lethal situation. Some families, it's just maybe taking the guesswork out of what can I do? If this happens, I could do this, or if this happens...
And you're talking about safety planning.
Exactly. But for some people where it is lethal, and how we're going to get to that is by finding out what's been going on in the past. Our best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And so when listening to a survivor, she is the expert of what's been happening in her home. And so we want to gather the information from her so that then we can put things in place to help protect her and the children from further violence. If she chooses to leave the home, then we also want to put things in place to help her so that she can leave safely or leave the area, because some people, they're not going to be safe to return back out to Manatee County. And so I think just taking the guesswork out of, if he does this, then I have this as an option, and really showing people some other ways and things to do to protect them and their children.
If I don't want to come into Hope, I'm still not quite there yet, but I think I might need a safety plan. Do I have any other options?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And they are?
We can go to either a safe place like Centerstone.
I know, I still call it Manatee Glen.
Or the hospital, or doctors, or
even the crisis line. We have people
or METV.
METV too.
I know.
But we have people that call us on the crisis line, and maybe that's, you know, the only call they're ever going to make, the only time they're ever going to share what's been happening in their life. And so a lot of times safety planning is done by phone. And then great, if we can get you to come into the office and offer more services, that's wonderful. But we certainly recognize that some people are not going to walk through the door. But the crisis line is anonymous, 24 hours a day. They can call and just be whoever they want or not even give a name, and we can just talk about the situation and figure out how we can best help them to be safe.
We had a caller named Tinkerbell. Think that's her real name?
Probably not.
Is that Ms. Bell, or can I just call you
I don't know,
Tinker?
parents are getting very creative with the names of their
I wondered.
children.
I thought, is she being funny? Is that her real name? Tinkerbell. Okay.
I think more as I work the streets, I see now more of your signs and your little call tabs.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yay, let's hear it
are,
from our marketing person.
Things like that is becoming more. I know a few years ago I dealt with a lady that was being battered, and she was afraid to go to the shelter. She was afraid to call. And we set it up to where she would come to my office to see an appointment, and we had one of your advocates come.
Oh, that's great.
Because she couldn't,
I didn't know
she
that.
didn't
That's
have the
great.
means to travel or go too many places without the batterer. So we talked about it, and I called and I talked to one of your advocates, and we put together a safety plan for her in our office. So, I mean, things like that, I think the more we can come together and do things like that, it's helpful, because I didn't know a lot of information, so I had to call you guys to find out what's going on and how can I do this. So the more you can get out and join forces, I think that's going to help a lot.
And if all else fails, we have a safety plan on our website, and it's in Spanish too, right? Didn't you translate? Somebody did that for us, and we put it on there in Spanish. Looking at Donna, who oversees the web page, before I say something that's not true. So, well, we're about halfway through the show. So I think we maybe see what the audience has to say. Questions, comments, concerns. And now look at all these enthusiastic people. Who's got the microphone? Miss Margarita, can you pass the microphone down, please?
I just have a question from just
Kathy, hold on one second. Does she have to flip that on, Margarita? The bottom? Well, I couldn't hear you in my lovely little earpiece. Oh,
I don't have my glasses on, sorry.
I feel your pain, sister.
I just had a question as a community member. And I run into a lot of people, talk to a lot of people in my community. Occasionally, I get a suspicion that somebody might be having a problem. What do I do to get them some information, maybe direct them so that they would be open enough to come to Hope?
That's a great question. Panelists, she has a neighbor or a community member she suspects is a victim of domestic violence. What should she do?
You can certainly bring her to Hope if you would like. You can put her on, give her our number, have her call us. I mean, our website, as Laurel had talked about, I know everybody seems to know a lot about computers these days. So, there's certainly that information out there. But if a neighbor or somebody is coming to you or any of us and you suspect that there might be intimate partner violence, I would listen. I would let them know that if there's something bigger going on that they might need to talk to somebody about, not only are we available as Hope advocates, but you are available, because sometimes people just need to tell what's going on. And again, if there's not physical violence, when there's physical violence, we can all say, okay, he gave me a black eye. I know that there's violence in the home. But if it's different than that, sometimes people don't even know that they're in an abusive relationship. It's just very controlling, manipulating. And so sometimes just being able to share with you but please refer them to us, because like Laurel said, safety planning is the key.
I just have one other question then. Suppose I'm not sure, or I'm not friendly enough with them to approach this suspicion. If I called a Hope, would they intervene in any way?
Nope. And let me tell you why, though, just so that it doesn't sound like we just go, sorry about your luck, lady, call somebody who cares. I mean, we wouldn't be like that. The reason we might give you some ideas about how to slip some literature to that person. We may have some ideas about what you could say to reach that person. But if we call and the batterer is there, we might place that victim in greater danger. And so we have a tendency to wait for someone to reach out to us.
Right.
I think the most powerful thing, and this is just many, many years ago when I was a frontline advocate, I asked a woman once, I got to know her very well. She had a huge court system issue, and I was her advocate for years. I wound up knowing her for years. And as I got to know her, one day I said to her, you lived with this abuse for so long, and what was the sort of pivotal thing for you? And she said, somebody looked at me and said, this isn't your fault. And that simple phrase, she said, nobody had ever told me that it wasn't my fault. And that's when she picked up the phone and called the agency I used to work for and got help. And I thought, wow, that's pretty powerful. I've never forgotten that. And so I have a tendency when I meet people to say, this isn't your fault. We're here for you. How can we help? That kind of stuff. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Would you be so kind as to pass that microphone down? That lovely lady in blue.
Hi.
Hello.
I have a question for the pastor. He mentioned about never speaking to just the lady, always having the husband with her. What if the lady comes to you and she's very frightened because she's been battered and her husband won't participate?
Well, let me
How would you
clarify.
handle that?
Yeah, let me clarify that statement. What I mean by just not the woman by herself, but to have someone with me, with that individual, so that her and I are not alone. That will put more stress on her and her husband's relationship.
And making sure you're safe as well,
Correct.
which is important.
Correct.
Perfect. Does that answer your question? Oh, Shar, do you have a mic for this gentleman? Hi.
So this question is for any of you. What are some of the misconceptions about domestic abuse in terms of the advice that people give that may not be good advice? Because I know sometimes everybody has a say or has something they want to add, and sometimes it's not always the right thing. And I'm sure you guys have people coming in and they have friends telling them to do a certain thing. What are some of the things that they say that are not correct?
Good question. Kim?
I think one of the largest problems that we contribute as part to this issue is we think women are safer if they leave. And so friends, family, coworkers, everybody seems to come forward and say, well, just leave them. And, all these other things. But what we recognize, not only lethality increases tremendously when somebody leaves, but also just like what Avery's talking about, the women and children he's seen sitting in the car, or, the young women that are coming to you, and how do I start this over? How do I have a young lady right now, she has no child care, full-time job, no child care. And that's ending on Friday. So, when we as a community, we say, well, just leave them, life is going to be better, life is going to be safer, I think we really need to take a look at why we think that for her. And so I think as a friend or a family member, the best thing we can do is be there, like I said, be there, listen, find out what she wants to do, because she is the expert as to what has been going on in her home. And so instead of us coming up with her plan, I would ask her, what is your plan, and then how do we help you to achieve that plan safely? So I think for me it's that.
The other thing I would add also is keep it confidential. If a person comes to you and wants to share their situation, don't ever share it, because then that makes you be in an abusive situation as well. I think most of the Hispanic community has been in that situations, if I can say that way.
Small community, people
Yes,
know
small
each other.
community. Yes, they all know each other. And so once they share, it goes back to the abuser.
Right.
And now they're
And then
not
what's
safe
going to happen
anymore.
to that victim?
I'm sorry.
And what happens to that victim?
They get abused all over again. So, and if they go to the family members, it's like he was sharing about the Bible. It's like, well, it's your cross, you carry it. And it's very hard for them to be out of an abusive relationship.
So telling the secret,
Yes.
telling her to just leave without a safety plan.
Right.
Is there anything else that you can think of as we've heard poor advice given?
Well, I think sometimes people think that women engage in this behavior. I certainly read it a lot in law enforcement reports, and so that, couple engaged in domestic violence, and I don't think women, if they're a victim of this crime, engage in it. They're the victim of it, and so I think maybe as a community, as a society, even looking at the language that we use could really help to change this issue. I think sometimes we don't know, and so we say things and don't realize that actually those words are putting her in a worse situation. Women aren't engaging in domestic violence. Women aren't looking for bad men. Women aren't looking to be abused. But I think men who are abusive find vulnerabilities about women, and they're easier to prey on and easier to manipulate, and all of a sudden easier to keep control. Absolutely.
I agree with you. One of the things I heard not terribly long ago, I was doing a presentation and someone said, well, come on, don't these women really like it? And I just was, well, no, I don't think they do. So, I mean, that's, answer your question?
Absolutely.
All right, what else? Can we pass the mic down, please? Oh, who's?
Do you ever get men coming into the shelter that are abused?
We absolutely do get men. We have a room at our shelter that's set up, probably should let our shelter director, Dawn, answer this. We have a room that's self-contained, for lack of a better way to put it, has its own bathroom facility, so there's no sharing. And we use it for any battered man who comes in who's in danger. We've also used it for moms with teenage boys. What people don't always realize is that many domestic violence centers throughout Florida, I don't know if it's the same throughout the nation, but I do know in Florida, there's only a handful of us that take teenage boys 12 and up. And if you think about it, I don't think they're trying to discriminate. I think it's a fear of if anybody's going to align with dad, it's going to be a 15-year-old boy. I mean, sometimes they're already demonstrating that same kind of behavior. And so, but we do take it, we ask the mom, it's up to you. Right. You tell us whether or not you think you're safe with your son here. And we use that room also for that. Oh, we've used it for people with dogs. And I hope our board members aren't watching. Just kidding. What dogs? What cats? I kid. I kibitz. But just something I think that the average person may not think about. I think when people ask about men being abused, people are thinking about heterosexual men. The battering rate in the male gay community is identical to women who are battered by men. Now, this is totally my opinion. I can't prove this. I do have almost 30 years under my belt in this business. I think whatever percentage, say it's 10% of the male population are violent, because I truly do believe 90% of the men in the world, like you gentlemen who are here, are great and powerful men who stand up against this violence and support women who are victims of domestic violence. But there is a percentage, we all know, or we'd be out of business. If it's 10% of the men in the world who are violent, it doesn't matter if they're gay or straight. They're batterers, period, amen. And to take that one step further, there are women who are abusive.
Yes.
But typically, when you understand the dynamics of this behavior, batterers pick on someone smaller. So what we generally see in our families is dad picks on mom, and if mom is violent, who's she picking on?
The child.
Children.
The kids. And so there's sort of a pecking order, if you will. And we've seen, Dawn, correct me if I'm wrong, at the shelter, sometimes a child will emerge as a bully.
Yes.
One of them will be a bigger kid sort of picking on the littler kids. they learn that behavior. But that's why we have a fantastic children's program. If I can just blow our own horn a little bit, we have a fantastic children's program where we will work with parents on their parenting and with the kids on de-escalating that, and try to teach them another way to live. So I'm very proud of that. But that's one of my favorite questions. Do you help men? We do. We like men. We like non-violent men, especially. Somebody else had their hand up. You've got a mic? Yes.
What can we do as members of the community and or citizens of Manatee County to get word to our lawmakers, our judges that sit on the bench, law enforcement, to maybe not make it so difficult to get orders of protection or injunctions? It seems to me that the numbers have gone down recently of those orders being issued. And if they have been issued, what can we do to get an extension on those? Is there anything we can do coming together as a community to get the word out that these are very important protectors for people that are violated and abused?
And I think that's a great question. Kim, if you could speak to a little bit about your CPI program and how that is an outgrowth of legislative efforts. I mean, how that all, the history of that program.
The project that I've been working on has been around 6 years. And the reason that it began, and I mean, we really we have a high rate of removal of children here in Manatee County from even a protective parent. And so when the project first began 6 years ago, I don't think any of us thought it would be the success that it is today. 7 counties throughout the state of Florida were asked to participate in this project. And so we have an advocate, me, and now we have Kayla. She now is on the project, but we have an advocate kind of outsourced to work with that system and help people kind of navigate through it, whether it's the child dependency system or the criminal justice system. And because of the success, again, we really thought maybe we'd be doing this for about a year. And because of the success of that project, it's now in all 67 counties in the state of Florida. There is an advocate doing this work. We've been able to hire a second advocate to help here so that we can continue to do the work we have been doing, because my job for a long time was a lot of frontline, working with the people that needed our service. But now what they're moving my role into doing is working more upfront with law enforcement and CPS, that we really can make a difference in keeping women with a non-offending parent, hopefully really taking a big step forward in holding more batterers accountable. Because again, I think what we saw happening, and I still think is happening at some level, is women are afraid to call out for help. Mm-hmm. You know, and I talk to my clients about that. You know, it's pretty sad when you're more afraid to make that phone call because of, okay, he's not going to be held accountable. He might go to jail for a night, or now CPS is involved, and they told me if an incident of violence happened, they have enough to take my children. So now I'm afraid of 2 systems that are set up to help protect me more so than I am of a man who's beating me. And so we really need to get that effort even out there more so that we can help women to feel safe to come forward, and be able to get the help that they need and not be afraid of the systems that we have in place, but yet
and to that end, the way that came about, that funding, we were one of those pilot projects, is because our law enforcement, the domestic violence service provider, Hope Family Services, the courts, the clerk's office, we all united, present a united front, and went to the Florida Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and they, years before it ever happened, and they started tracking those statistics. Yep. And I think in answer to the question is that we as a community, everybody, it can't just be Hope, it can't just be law enforcement, it can't just be Cornerstone, Manatee Glens, whatever. It has we all together have to present a united front, because let's face it, legislatures are elected.
Well,
and if we all track how they're voting on things and we pay attention, I mean, our staff know. I am the first to say, did you vote? Did you vote? I don't care who you vote for, but did you vote? Did you vote? Did you vote?
And we need good men involved. I mean, I have said that for so many years. I remember when I first started, trying to help victims of this crime, and every room I would go in, there were women, a sea full of women. And I would say, that's great. Where are the men? And people would say, oh, this is a woman's issue. No, this isn't. This is a community issue. And we need good men. And I will tell you, the last person a batterer is ever going to hear from is me. But they might hear from you, and they might hear from the pastor or the other good men in this community to say, listen, it's not acceptable to beat your wife. Right. And let me show you some other better behaviors. And if you struggle with power and control, go get the help yourself. And so I was really glad that you cleared that up, that you don't counsel alone for your safety, because I agree with that. But at Hope, we would not recommend couples counseling. Right. Because I will tell you what ends up happening, one of two things. Either she's going to feel so comfortable because that counselor is there, and so she says, let me tell you everything. Right. And she tells everything, and then God help her what's going on when they go home.
Well, a lot of times.
Or she'll never tell the truth because I've got my husband sitting here looking at me.
That's right.
Well, a lot of
Thanks,
times the male may present a more calm presentation
they present
in
very
front of
well.
us, and we never know once they get back in that car.
Exactly.
Well, why did you say that? X, Y, Z.
Exactly.
So I understand.
Wait till we get home.
And you bring up a good point. They present very well. And so sometimes I think the misconception, as you're asking, is we're thinking that we can identify these batterers just by looking at them. And you can't.
You can't.
And it doesn't matter your race. It doesn't matter how much money you have in the bank. Yeah. This crime can touch any life out there, and that's why, again, it takes community efforts to say, we're in this together, we're going to help to keep women and their children safe.
Thank you, Kim. We've got time for one more question.
My question is, does an abuser ever change? Does he ever stop being an abuser?
Oh, I'm an optimist, but I don't know about that. I mean, I like to stay optimistic. I think you have to think
I guess that depends on who you ask.
That's right.
The abuser may tell you they've changed. And a batterers program, I think they have clear statistics on whether or not batterers change. But Maria, in your experience, any of the women, what's your...
It's not the batterer that needs to change. It's ourselves sometimes because of the self-esteem. The battery has lowered the victim's self-esteem so low that it has made them feel that it's their fault, like you said. But I don't think batterers, I don't think. It's very hard.
Avery, you care to weigh in on this?
Yeah.
I think they can. I think
the
pastor said earlier, he had said that, about counseling and breaking, it's a cycle.
Yeah.
And like you're saying with the children, they see it and then they become bullies.
Oh, please,
but I think
raise our kids better.
If we can get the counseling and get everybody, if that person wants to be counseled and see that it happened to me, it happened before me, and you break that cycle. And I think the batterer can, if they're willing to do the counseling and
therein lies the key. The willing to go to counseling.
Right.
Because one of the things batterers have a tendency to think everything that's wrong in their life is everybody else's fault.
Right. That's right.
So counseling, I want to change or fix me.
Right.
So sometimes those things are mutually exclusive. Time is marching on, ladies and gentlemen. So if we can just end with a few brief comments.
Talking to me?
No, Kim, I would never say. You're positively shy and retiring. Kim and I have worked together a long time, in case you've wondered. So just final comments. If there is a victim at home watching this, what do you want her to know?
I want her to know that there are resources that are available for her to get that help, that help that will build her up. To know who she is. And I think a lot of the bigger problems is that, as she said here, that self-esteem is so lowered. And battery doesn't start out physical. It starts out verbal, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And so there are people that do care outside of the household. And if she can get those resources she can find life again.
Thank you. Maria?
In the Hispanic population, it's very hard to come forward and say, I need help, but there is help. We also speak Spanish.
See?
Sí. Muy
Not
bien.
me.
So if there's anyone you know, or if there's anything, just call us and we'll get you in the right location.
Want to say it in Spanish?
Si necesita ayuda, háblenos.
Gracias.
If you need help, call us.
Avery, what would you say if there's a person watching who says, boy, I think this is it. What do I do now?
Yeah. To the homeless population that I deal with, I would say that it is hope and it is help. If you can find your way to a homeless center or a laundromat, pick up a tab off the paper and call it. You can come to CenterStone and we can talk to you there and we can connect you with help or counseling, So it is help for the homeless. Just come, talk to us, and we can try to help you out.
Miss Kim, what would you say to that person who...
Well, I love all the answers. I think reaching out, I think knowing that there's a community here that really wants to try and help and have women and children live a safer life, that there's a way out. I really believe that. We would like to help and be a part of that.
Well, what a perfect segue.
Yes.
Speaking of a way out,
yes.
Here's the commercial. So those of you who are at home, if you are wondering, how can I help? Besides, thank you for watching this show, being a resource for someone that you may know who needs help. There's another thing you can do to help us. On October 24th, A Way Out, a film, is premiering Manatee Performing Arts Center. We are very excited. I can't even tell you, it's been a labor of love. We were in this very room a year ago starting to talk about it. METV, in concert with BTN Film Production. I like to say I'm an associate producer, not sure if I'm getting that credit. It's actually Kimberly's story and other women who have escaped the darkness of domestic violence, who have in fact found a way out. And it's the international premiere of this movie, and I just can't even begin to tell you how spectacular that is right here in our community, that this film has been made, produced, and it's amazing. And we couldn't do any of it without METV and Charles Clapsaddle and his staff and their support, because they have worked tirelessly on this film. Kim, is there anything you want to add to this?
I'm just thrilled to be a part of it. I know there are other women that have also shared their story on the film. And I just think it's a great thing. I'm glad that we're doing it now. I know for a long time people have said, do you want to tell that story? You want to tell that story? And I never wanted it to just be a sad story. And so I think being part of this movement for the last 27 years, I mean, it's no longer just one woman's sad story. It's how we as a community come together, and now we can help other people. So just that I'm very happy to be a part of it.
And as I said when we started, next month, October, or depending on when someone's watching this, might be this month if they're watching it in October. October is National Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and in 1981 it started with a single day of unity, it was called, and advocates from all over the country came together. And if you look at where we are now in October, and this film premiere is part of that October National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And truly, we couldn't have done it without the Sarasota Film Festival. They are sponsoring it, their support. There's been donors who have supported it. Again, it's amazing. Ticket information, oh my gosh, I just went blank. Performing Arts Center website, October 24th, Manatee Performing Arts Center.com. So, thank you for watching. Thank you for being a fabulous panel. Please give it up for the panelists. Panelists, give it up for the audience. Thank you all very much. Be safe. Peace. Good night.
Thank you.